this Child and Law Foundation, which is a small little project, grew and grew and grew.
Beautiful. Good afternoon, Naira. Lovely to meet you. What an honor it is to be sitting here with you, doing a beautiful interview with you. We're discussing your book today, The Sun on Your Back.
Yep. Thanks, Shania.
I would love to just start by introducing everyone to you and what inspired you to write the book, where you got the love for the passion for your psychology, working with children. Let's just talk a little bit about you to start.
Okay, well, I lived most of my life in Zimbabwe. That's why the book is so set in that venue. And I went to school in Zimbabwe and I trained at the uni there. And when I first left uni, I joined a department in the ministry called School Psychological Services, where essentially you were called out to schools to deal with children with problems, and then you worked out programs for them or placed them in better places. And it was while I was doing this work that I'd often find children failing in school, but for no apparent reason. And that sort of built up, and then it clicked to me that I have to look for emotional things, and basically those were the reasons I found. Yeah, so the interest sort of grew from there, and then a colleague and I did a research in schools in Harare, and we found that 1 in 3 girls, secondary school girls in school, said they had suffered sexual abuse of some sort. Stepdads, neighbors, lodgers, uncles, that sort of stuff. And sadly, the same was true for boys as well. They also said that this is what was going on. So from there, from that research, I started doing more research, and then finally I joined an organization called Training and Research Support Center, which had a small little project there called the Child and Law Foundation, which looked at legal issues surrounding children. How is the state really looking after children? And then this Child and Law Foundation, which is a small little project, grew and grew and grew.
Beautiful.
And, became this huge multi-sectoral project, which was funded by Red Banner, Save the Children Norway, the UN, the WHO. So a lot of funding went into that. And
sorry, I'm interrupting you here, but are these organizations still active? Are people still donating towards these organizations?
The foundation was a 10-year project, and the aim was to get the project established, train relevant ministries so they could take over. And that's what we did. So it meant working on legal issues. Are the laws really protecting children? Setting up a system where children are actually able to talk about their issues, a victim-friendly system, training professionals. Because you can imagine, most professionals had very little information. I had very little information until I went and learned.
This is what I found really fascinating. Obviously, getting through your book was that, as thrilling as it is, as you're reading it, you've written it so well from the perspective you can really understand, from the abuser's perspective. But also you've included aspects of us understanding how the law works. So you almost want to get involved and help, because you realize that it actually doesn't favor women and children. And as a mother, being very relatable to the story, I was fascinated by the fact that, men get a lighter serving than women, that it really hits a chord that you're thinking, wow, these women have no protection. Where do they go? How do they approach the law when the law is actually not in their favor?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, that was very deep for me. And as a woman, I think, you know, naturally we want to help and empower, and what can we do, and where can they go, and what would be the first step that one would take, you know, if the law is against them, or where do these young girls go?
Well, the problem we found was that because the first sort of in the system, a lot of people will go straight to the police, and that didn't work out so well because the police don't have much training, and also most police stations are run by conservative men, you know, so they're not going to believe anyone in particular. So that was also our first starting point, training the police to be more susceptible, to understand that children are not lying. If a child is telling you that, it's telling you for a reason, you know, and it needs to be investigated.
And also, I found, you know, that how can a child fabricate that? I mean, you know, sometimes they don't even understand what they actually, it's a feeling, you know, at that age in the book, when her sexual abuse started with her father, she wouldn't have even known how to communicate that, you know, let alone a child that's maybe at school with a bully. You know, it's a feeling, it's a sensation that they get that they know is wrong. You know, how do they communicate that into words? So I mean, this is huge, to try and change not only a system, but people's beliefs of how they've been brought up, you know, how we are now becoming into a generation where we can actually talk about these things, and we can actually be in a society where, you know, we can encourage, you know, as you say, helping each other, making these organizations, setting these things up to make it okay for people to actually be heard.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. From a home point of view, I think it's really important for children to learn to protect themselves, to communicate with their parents. If something is unusual, make sure that children realize they can come to you with the problem. So, yeah, that's the first step, I think, because often...
So as a mother, speaking from this perspective, are there signs that you could pick up that something is off, that something would be wrong in your child? Let's maybe talk about that first. Like, would there be something that, you know, that a child would be displaying that would say, oh, maybe this is a red flag?
Absolutely. They're sort of established indicators. With very young children, and even secondary school children, you do find that it affects their schoolwork. That's how I found them. Secondly, with very young children who get sexualized, they will emulate the sexual behaviors in the classroom.
Ah, that's interesting.
I'm sort of telling you what I found.
Yes, totally.
The other thing that you find is that with secondary school girls, they will then go out and be a lot more sexual as well, you know, look for partners, etc. So if you're a parent who's doing his or her job, you will certainly notice differences there. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to the book. I found obviously one aspect quite frustrating, actually, in the book, as in, I mean, it churned me that obviously being a mother, you know, the mother was not acting out in almost a protective way over her children, which I loved. That was to your story. I just, you know, you're not expecting a mother to not just say, oh, well, I'm going to protect you and, you know, leave. That's how scary it is, and how, you know, vulnerable these women are that are being compounded with this kind of abuse every single day. I mean, she was confined. I don't want to give away the story because I really want people to go and read it. But
Yeah.
I found that that is how it works. That's how powerful abuse is, that they can actually dominate so much that almost like a protective mechanism is to protect yourself first. So I found that fascinating. Let's say we are in a situation where that is the case. You know, for me also, my heart went out to a lot of people that have obviously been going through this COVID and are stuck at home. I mean, this takes on a whole new aspect. People can't just, you know, leave home and go and speak to anyone about it. Are there means and ways of like getting onto social media or other ways that people can kind of interconnect with someone who could help them?
Yeah, that's been a real issue around, certainly in the UK, and the government's been good about recognizing that people are isolated, especially as the number of deaths of women from an intimate partner went up substantially over the COVID period. I'm sure you've read all the reports.
Yeah.
And so there are systems in place for you to contact, to get counseling, to talk, to be safe. The police are on alert. So yeah, they've done a good job there.
Yeah. That's
Diara's and Sophia's stories well over a decade ago. You know, the time setting is a decade ago.
Okay. I did want to ask about that. Yeah.
What horrified me was that 5 days into the first lockdown we had in the UK, a man called Anthony Williams killed his wife. They were pensioners. And when he was sentenced, the judge gave him 5 years. Now you get 5 years for like car theft or you know, beating someone up or something. So when I went back and read the report, the judge said that it was obvious that poor Anthony was so overcome with 5 days of lockdown, and he was so worried that he lost himself and his emotions went haywire, and he, as a result, killed his wife. But in the evidence, one of the policemen gave, or the neighbors gave evidence that, and she said something to him in the bedroom. He got annoyed. She ran down the stairs with the front door keys in her hand and went out the front door. He ran after her, followed her, and strangled her to death with a dressing gown cord. Her neck was fractured in 5 places. And I thought to myself, is this not telling you something? Why would a wife run away from a husband if they had a good relationship? You know, so although Sophia and Andre and Diara were a decade ago in a developing country, my dear, in the first world, it's just as bad.
And I think, as you say, that the heart of the story is still the same. You know, what happens behind closed doors, you know, what is happening to these abusers. One thing I did want to ask you was obviously how she still, the mother still puts a protective mechanism on the actual abuser, which I also find quite interesting. But I think, you know, we can all relate to someone, or even in our own lives, where maybe in the past we have been part of a verbal abuse or something. But do these abusers come from, in your case, we're just talking about what your history is with psychology and where your history of what you've dealt with, but do these abusers actually come from abusive families? Is it 90% cases that they are abused, therefore they follow that pattern into their abusive families, or can it be something that triggers it, stress, other things trigger them now leading into an abusive behavior?
I think I can say internationally, most research shows that only a third of a group of abusers go on to be abusive. So 2/3 of them actually say, oh my God, I don't want to live my life like this ever again. And, go on and don't abuse. But certainly 1/3 of them would go on and do that. Yeah.
Okay, so that I've learned something today then, because I actually thought that maybe that was something that, so that's awesome, because that was also a lovely, twist in the story for me, how Diara really, really wants to focus on, she's obviously going to have to live with this. And I think this is where we need to understand that it's a lifelong thing for abusers, that this stays with them forever. But where she does find her own love and her own appreciation of her self-worth was a very touching part to the story as well. I think, thank you for taking us on that, that deepness in the story, but also leading us into, there are means and ways of, she had a beautiful support system in a different family, a loving family. And just by having someone that listens to her, or she could reach out to, actually change the course of her life. So I think that is a very key point for me, and I don't know about you, that this is what you were trying to set up. This is your prayer. This is the heart of your story, that everyone needs someone to talk to. Your voice, you need a voice to listen, and as well as a voice to offload what you have to say. So I loved that side to it.
I love that side as well, and thank you for recognizing that, because even as a school counselor, psychologist, one thing that it never goes away. All these children you meet, they always infiltrate in some way, even though you get debriefed. And I mean, all people who work with violence get a special kind of debrief. But I'll tell you, it never goes away. And those girls, that family of girls who the story is based on, obviously they were totally different to the story, because this is fiction, but they never went away, because they were like these were the first really awful, the most awful case. I mean, I can't even articulate it. So that person was called to the hospital to deal with that attempted suicide. That was my first awakening.
Okay, so thank you for sharing that for us, because that was actually I wanted to actually ask you that. I wanted to actually say the inspiration, the heart of, how you use this book is almost like your own therapy. But almost as in using it as your own therapy, it's shared a story that so millions and so many of us can relate to. But I wanted to ask you, was it from some of your cases? Was it from, obviously you took from different stories of different children that you worked with, but was there anything that was really a chord that hit it for you there?
Yeah, so that family, I had promised myself that I would always write their story, because
beautiful.
Believe me, this is watered down to what that family went through. So what happened was that when we moved to the UK, although I carried on doing a bit of work for my old office, mostly editing, checking facts on research reports, I wanted to write these stories. So it took me a year of what do you call it, self-beating. I had to open all these memory boxes again and go through all this case history. And then I had to make up fictitious characters using all this information. But I wanted all the information to be true, but on fictitious characters. So it took me a year of unpacking it. And then I didn't know how to write. I mean, I knew how to write research reports. I knew how to write psychological assessments, those are I knew how to talk, but I didn't know how to write a book. So then I did an online course on how to write a novel. Wow. And this was an amazing course because it allowed you to draw in all your information. And at the end of the course, you actually had a draft. And then I worked on that draft for 2 or 3 years. Nice. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I like that because it's almost like it's also in the book where you talk about how it's almost like people just don't want to relate to this kind of abuse. I mean, it's hard to even talk about it to us, you know, as a society, just to talk about it, let alone the poor girl now actually relaying what's actually physically happened to her, or as, you know, being an abusive relationship, whether it's not sexual abuse or whether it's just, you know, any trigger of an abusive family. So I think that is a, you know, if it's tough for you to write about it, it shows the depth of how hard it is for these young girls, for these women to face this in their own journeys.
Absolutely. And once they reported it in the former system, they were forced to stare at their abuser while they gave evidence. I mean, in the old system, can you imagine a 10-year-old child having to do that? And the sad thing is a lot of these children still love that father or whoever it was. With this case, we were lucky because both Diara and his sister hated the father. And so it's easier to work therapeutically with people who, you know, can't cope. But when your emotions are all mixed up with love and hate and oh, it's such a murky, mucky field therapeutically.
I mean, how long does it take to work? I mean, how long have you got with a psychology case? So let's say you're taking on a client. I mean, it's hours and hours and hours of therapy.
Yeah.
You know, and you're having to send this poor child back into her everyday life before you've actually even the chance to sort of, you know, go through this therapy with her. So, I mean, let's try. And I love also the way you've obviously given in your book places, you know, and places that they can obviously go to or relatable things. And I'm sure we'll put them on the video as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know, where do they go first? What is the first step? I mean, you know, in the book, it's also very heart-wrenching because she goes to her teacher. She goes to her, you know, and that's courage. That's courage for a young girl to just stand up and have, you know, the courage to go and talk to someone. And my heart bled for her that she did have people that she went and spoke to, but they just weren't a voice for her. So, you know, I think, you know, in some cases, is it lucky with who these children talk to, or is there somewhere that they can obviously reach out to?
I think a bit of both. With Diara, it was a bit of both, wasn't it? But now the law in Zimbabwe makes it mandatory for first service providers that if they suspect or the child tells them, it's mandatory for them to report, which wasn't the case when Diara was at school. You know,
great. So I wanted to actually ask you that. I wanted to ask you if laws had changed, because, you know, when you wrote that in the book, I think we discussed that has this process, you know, changed over time since you've written the book, or since you've left, or since you invested so much of your love into helping these children?
The laws had already changed when I was still working there, because a whole new legislation came out to protect children. And this included a friendly legal system and a friendly clinic at the hospitals where children could report abuse and be tested, provided with antiretrovirals, etc. So that was all very much in place when I was there. And that was part of our big program. I can't say what's going on now. I can imagine it's a stressed out system now, but really, in terms of legislation, I've always thought that Zimbabwe has really good legislation to protect children. And resources were always there. Childline was there. Musasa Project was there, you know, for domestic violence, etc. So, yeah, it's there. It just needs to be revitalized.
Great. So I think as hard as it was to read, it's enthralling. It's enthralling. I didn't want to put it down personally. It's you know, it's heart-wrenching, but it also makes you just want to have compassion, you know, towards being a voice and just helping these women. So I think thank you for being a voice for them and taking the time out of your life to just, you know, tell their story and relate it for them.
Please don't give me any accolades. This is not my story. This is the story of all these wonderful women and children that I've been honored to meet over my professional life, and who I always felt I didn't do enough for, because there were just so many negativities that you know, so many obstacles you could get over. But I always say that I hope that in some way, some little thing that I did helped them, because it was an overwhelming situation, really the most overwhelming situation. And I tried to water it down in the novel, because I find that people, as you say, they're not receptive to truth. You know, they want, do you remember Sophia's lawyer said to Diara, let's try and do it in a reasonable way. Let's not make it too shocking so that the court thinks that we're exaggerating. And that's what I found, And even when I'd go in to give expert testimony for a client, you can't get over the silly questions those prosecutors ask. They're so ridiculous.
I mean, it is, and it's almost like being punched in the gut, you know, even when you're reading the story that these poor girls have endured. And it's so, again, how you've written it is amazing, because you see the side to her breaking down, and she has to relive this entire abusive life that she's trying to put behind her. She's got to go through this whole thing again, and then you get, the prosecutor going, oh well, and sugarcoating it that it's all her fault. And that is just, it's hard to understand that is how much protection abusive women or children have on their side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's easier for people, as I said, for people to believe their children lie than to face the fact that their stepdad, neighbors abusing them. I think it's hard. It's hard.
Yeah. It's ironic. And, I mean, I try, trying to put myself many times in that position. If, my daughter came to me and sort of said, this is happening or that's happening, or would she be able to do that, So I think it's key. It's so key in today's world where everything is so fast, to have that connection, with be it not just your children, maybe just, when children come to play, or, just take time to notice what's rushing past us. And if we can reach out and extend that love and support in any way, you've really shown us that in your book, that, you have to extend your heart. Just try and be present, I think, in another person's story.
Absolutely. And recognize, what amazes me, when I first moved to the UK, you know how we are in Zim? We talk to everyone, even people sitting at your pedicure station. You talk to everyone. But here, everyone was a lot more reserved and the first thing that came to mind was that I wonder if anyone would ever report abuse here, because it's so scary to have to do it. Yeah, but if you can listen to someone's story, share their story, help them with their pain, it goes such a long way to helping them heal. If you can have really good communication with your children, teach them the difference between right or wrong, teach them to make the right decisions. Decision-making skills are so important. You will then you'll empower your children not to be in these situations, you know, to learn how to make the right choice. And I think it all starts in the home. I think that Diara had a personality. Her personality said, I'm not going to put up with any of this
very
anymore.
much so. Yes. And that I did like that, because her sister wasn't as courageous, and I like the twist in the book as well, where you know, everything for me you covered everything, you know, like how she left and she went to live with this lovable, supportive family, but she had to leave her family behind in order to do that. But in the same breath, how her sister then relates to her at the end, just saying, you know, you carried on with your life. This abuse got worse. This carried on. But had Diara not left, you know, she wouldn't have been able to look back and help them in the end. So it was all relatable. And, you know, obviously it does have I don't know how you can put a happy lining on that story, but it did, you know, she did find her own path and her own story and her own love for her own child. So I loved it all. I loved it. It was a beautiful, beautiful written story. Thank you.
Thank you. That's made me feel so good.
It really was very touching.
I wanted the end. I wanted people to realize, people who've gone through similar situations, and what I found in my experience was that you can actually get on with your life. You can learn to deal with this situation and the terrible things you've gone through, and you can find a life for yourself. Try not to stay with that terrible situation. Try and move past it. And I'm happy to, you know, happily, you do get cases, quite a few cases, if you do your job properly, where you get people moving forward. So, yeah, thank you, Shania.
Yeah, I think, you know, the fact that she found that her old story didn't define who she was, you know, and I love, there was a you know, a passage there where she says, and she almost stops herself and she says, don't give your power away. I'm giving my power away. Like I'm Diara. Like I have, you know, I've changed my life. I don't need to give any more of my self-worth. And that hit a chord for me, whether it's in an abusive relationship. That is just a beautiful metaphor for, you know, for life. So I think if they can find tools and keys, I agree with you, then their voice just gets a little bit louder. And I think that's where the beauty is, if they can find it.
Diara was lucky because she had this attraction to this boy for many years, and it did save her. You know, when I look back at my notes, he actually did save her. The thought of him and the thought of being with him actually kept her safe.
And also what I loved was the softness that his character brought, you know, from this abusive story that she has, this hard, wrenching life. And then she has this softness where he's patient and he's loving and he's kind, and that's so beautiful, you know, that she did find a light for her story, and growth came from it. But as you say, Diara was lucky. You know, I think the key here also is to just feel that there are so many that, you know, maybe don't have someone that they can go to, or don't have that. So these are the abusers, these are the children that we want to have a voice for, and actually have these organizations where, you know, we just make them louder so that they are a place where these children can go.
Absolutely, absolutely. The one thing that my editor, Jane, it was funny because when she was editing, she did the first edit, she kept, every time I talked about the legal system, she'd say, is this true? Is this true? Is this true? just the way you did. But one thing
that's,
she did,
yeah.
but
that's where I say to you, it's so relatable in your book, because you know, you've put it in such an easy way for us to understand. And it's frightening. It's a frightening way to understand it, but it is digestible, as you say. You know, it is digestible so that we can understand. It doesn't support women. These are the facts. This is the law. So
and nothing's changed, you know. As I said, look at Oscar Pretorius. What sort of sentence did he get? You know, as in the book I said, look at O.J. Simpson. What did he got off? You know, so nothing much has changed.
And you still find the world disbelieving his story, isn't it? I mean, even in the world will say, oh, but he had, you know, there was so much evidence in playing with a gun under his lamp at a restaurant, or, you know, whatever there was to that story. There's still people like, but he didn't do it. You know, it's crazy. Absolutely
Horrible.
Crazy, as you say. Yeah.
One thing that, again, my editor did was she pulled out, there was a whole chapter on Andre, the father, excuse me, his backstory when he lived in Cape Town. And she took it out because she felt that this whole book was Diara's journey, and we didn't want Andre's backstory to be part of it. So she did take out that chapter, but it wasn't thrown away.
No, but I like it, because I don't think, you know, I think the heart of the story is exactly where you put it. It is Diara's journey. And I think, you know, the brief court case of where we get a little bit of summary on him is enough. I think that summed him up. I mean, he was summed up through their stories anyway, when they then related to the abuse and whatever. So his backstory is there. And as you say, I don't think, you know, again, as you said as you related to the court case, when they were in the court case, people just can't deal with it. They can't deal with hearing these stories. It's almost like they rather block it out than actually have to deal with the truth.
Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. I can tell you from my own experience how uncomfortable you feel when you're first faced with these issues. You have to pull yourself together and say, okay, get on and do your job. You know, so you need to get on and do your job. But let's pray. Yeah, let's look for a better world.
Well, as I say, thank you. I mean, your therapy is, you know, is a story that's shared and is helping others. So I think that's, you have a voice through a story, and I think, as you say, even if it's fiction or whatever, it's relatable, and when it reaches someone's heart through what you're trying to say, I think that makes it more relatable for people to kind of actually know that this is what's happening in the world, and it's sad, but it's true.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But on a positive note, it was written beautifully. Everybody needs to read this book, honestly, and it's not, you know, something, you know, just time-wise, it is something that it was enthralling. I didn't want to put it down. So it was beautifully written for someone who didn't know how to write a book. I think it was, I loved it. I loved it. As much as you can love that kind of a story, it was brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for sharing it with the world. And thank you for taking the time to do the interview.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say the ironic part is that it's very difficult for Zimbabweans to get a copy of the book. So sadly, not many of them are able to get it. So hopefully we'll be able to ship enough books out there so people can read them.
Okay, so that is the story, but also everyone is on their phones now. And what I found really interesting was that even if you have an Android, an Apple, whatever kind of phone you have, with all these apps, you are actually able to download a Kindle app onto your phone.
Absolutely.
And I mean, your story can be shared you can read it on your phone. So I mean, you can read it between running around, whatever, you can actually, there is access to it through that. And I mean, I think it was next to nothing, rather than buying a paperback. So they give you two options, Kindle or paperback. And for me, it was very easy to get my hands on. So hopefully we can get some copies though, because I think hopefully you'll visit soon and we can
absolutely
and share your story here.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Just to remind viewers that they should check for the Kindle version on Amazon.com, not Amazon.co.uk, because they don't deal in that region at all.
Okay.
So that would help. And I'd love to hear from your viewers. It's a way of it's often what I found in the UK is that women will contact me and say, blah, talk about their own lives and then talk about what they've done about their lives and where else they can go. And I think that's important. That's the purpose.
I do think that, yes. Let's share more stories. Let's get more word out. And also, I loved the resemblance. I also grew up in Zimbabwe. So for me, it was so touching to read that side of it as well. And that you've obviously moved on to the UK. And so it was lovely. So yes, let's hope people can reach out after you being brave enough to share, even if it's fiction, just something for the journey of these abused ladies and children.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Naira. Thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all that lovely information behind your book.
Thank you. You are fabulous. It was enjoyable. Let me tell you, an English lady interviewing you is so different from a Southern African one.
Really? Well, you know what? When something touches you, and it's easy to relate to. So thank you again, and we'll speak soon. We all want to know when the next book is coming out.
It's in the research process. It's also set in Zimbabwe, but it's a whole different story. So we'll chat about it a bit on. But what everyone who has read Diara's story, please look out on my website, because I've rewritten Andre's story as a short story, because I think it's important people understand a little bit about abusers and their lives, because if we don't, how are we going to break that cycle of violence?
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. We will put that attached to this video, your website, all your details. People can reach out to you. That's wonderful. Whether you've got Instagram, Facebook, whatever, then they do feel that they can relate and reach out, and you've got open arms to that. So thank you so much.
Lovely to meet you.
You too, and we'll speak soon.
Absolutely. Take care.
Bye. Bye. Take care. Bye.